Tired of feeling overwhelmed by social media negativity? You can't control what happens online, but you can control your reaction. Today, you'll follow the real and emotionally raw journey of Richella, UX designer from Austin, who went from drowning in online toxicity to finding clarity, courage, and peace through the timeless wisdom of Stoic philosophy. This isn't just a story, it's a roadmap for anyone who's ever felt lost in the scroll, crushed by comparison, or paralyzed by the pressure to be seen and approved. And it all started with one anonymous message that nearly broke her. 1. The digital labyrinth, a Stoic awakening in the age of noise. She never thought one message could break her. It was 1:43 a.m. when Rachel sat in the dark of her Austin apartment, staring at her phone screen, palms sweating. The words glowed like fire, sharp, cruel, calculated. You're a fraud. Stop pretending you're helping anyone. People like you are the reason no one trusts anything online. Sent by a stranger. No profile picture, no warning. And yet, it shattered something inside her. Rachel was no stranger to the digital world. As a UX designer in one of America's most vibrant tech hubs, she lived in the current of innovation, user flow, and online experience. Her days were filled with creative meetings, UI mock-ups, coffee-fueled brainstorms. But her nights belonged to the scroll. The endless, merciless scroll. Instagram feeds of people smiling wider, living louder, tweets sharp enough to cut through steel, TikToks promising the one mindset that will change your life in 30 seconds. And through it all, this invisible ache, like she was falling behind, like her real life could never measure up to the glossy performances she's consumed every day. And now, this message, this faceless voice confirming her worst fear, that she wasn't enough. Rachel threw her phone across the couch and broke into tears, not because she believed the words, but because she had let them in. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, foggy-eyed and raw, she wandered to the Colorado River Trail for a walk she couldn't explain. And somewhere between the sound of her boots on gravel and the quiet murmur of water, she opened a random podcast titled Stillness in the Scroll. Stoicism for the Modern Mind. The voice said one sentence before she stopped in her tracks. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. It was Epictetus, a philosopher dead for 2,000 years. And yet, it felt like he was speaking to her soul. That moment, that sentence didn't heal her, but it cracked open a door she didn't know existed. She spent the rest of the day in silence, reading quotes from dead men who somehow understood exactly what she was going through. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Seneca warned, "If you are easily provoked, then learn not to be so easily controlled." None of these men had Instagram. None had been trolled on Twitter. But they had been mocked, exiled, even enslaved. And yet, they spoke of peace not as something to wait for, but something to build. Rachel realized the problem wasn't social media. The problem was letting social media dictate her inner world. She had become addicted not just to the content, but to the reaction, the attention, the validation. And it left her hollow. That night, she asked herself a question that would change her life. What if I treated my mind like sacred ground? She made a choice, not to disappear from the digital world, but to take back control within it. She re-downloaded her social apps, but with a new rule: they no longer had permission to own her. From now on, she would live like a modern Stoic, navigating the noise, but anchored in stillness. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she knew this much: she was done letting strangers decide her worth. And if you've ever felt buried beneath the weight of online expectations, if you've ever questioned your value after reading a cruel comment or watching someone else's perfect life play out on screen, you're not alone. This is just the beginning. Before we dive deeper into Rachel's journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button Supporting the channel helps us bring you more powerful, honest stories, rooted in ancient wisdom, made for modern hearts. And now, for a quick challenge to get your mind engaged. Which Stoic quote resonates more with you right now? A. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Marcus Aurelius. B. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. Epictetus. Drop your answer in the comments. A or B. Let's see where your mind stands today. 2. The mirror and the flame. Cultivating emotional resilience online. The days that followed Rachel's Stoic awakening weren't filled with dramatic changes or sweeping transformations. Instead, they were quiet, deliberate. She didn't suddenly become invincible to negativity, nor did the digital world soften its claws. But something inside her had shifted. Each morning, before opening a single app, she sat with a notebook, not for planning or productivity, but for self-examination. Her journaling became a sacred ritual, a clearing of the fog before the chaos of the day. She wrote without censorship, the thoughts that clung to her after dreams, the emotions lingering from yesterday's interactions, and most importantly, the fears that whispered to her in silence. One morning, after waking from a dream about drowning in a crowd of voices, she wrote, "Today I will remember, not all thoughts are facts." That line became a cornerstone for her emotional resilience. Whenever an online post stirred her insecurity or a comment triggered her defensiveness, she returned to that truth. She didn't have to believe everything that flashed across her mind. The digital world was a theater of illusions, highlight reels, half-truths, outrage masquerading as conviction. And Rachel had spent years absorbing it all, mistaking urgency for importance, emotion for meaning. But now, she was learning to pause, to examine, to respond, not react. It was during this transformation that she began sharing her reflections with Liam. He had always been someone she trusted, funny, grounded, a bit of a skeptic, but with a deep appreciation for philosophy. When she told him about her Stoic practice, he grinned and said, "You're going full Marcus on me, huh?" They started a new habit together, something they jokingly called scroll breaks. Every few hours, they'd step away from their screens, take a walk or just sit quietly and ask each other one question. What did I feel while scrolling today? It seemed simple, but over time, it became a mirror they held up to their digital behavior. Rachel noticed patterns. She grew restless after watching influencer content that painted perfection in curated colors. She felt frustrated when political threads turned into digital shouting matches. But she also noticed moments of joy: a video of a rescued dog, a post about someone overcoming grief, a poem about stillness. The screen wasn't inherently toxic. It was her unconscious immersion that poisoned the experience. When she began watching herself watching, something remarkable happened. The noise didn't stop, but it stopped owning her. One afternoon, Rachel came across a viral post criticizing someone she admired. The comments were brutal. A few months ago, she might have joined in, shared it, or stewed silently in judgment. But this time, she asked herself, is this feeding my values or my vanity? The answer was clear. She closed the app, opened her notebook, and wrote, "Let others burn. I will reflect light." Liam, too, had moments of clarity. He told her about a comment thread that had triggered old insecurities about his work. "I felt like I needed to prove myself," he said. "But then I remembered. I'm not here to win arguments, I'm here to live with integrity." Their conversations weren't therapy sessions, but they were honest, raw, and healing. Over time, Rachel began to see emotions, not as enemies, but as signals. Anger meant a value had been violated. Envy pointed to a neglected desire. Shame revealed where she still tied her worth to outcomes. The digital world became her dojo space, not for distraction, but for inner training. She wasn't trying to numb herself. Quite the opposite. She was learning to feel clearly, to hold the flame of emotion without letting it scorch her soul. On her bathroom mirror, she taped a handwritten quote, "What stands in the way becomes the way." She read it every morning. It reminded her that each emotional wave, each spark of irritation or twinge of comparison, was not an obstacle to her growth, but the exact terrain of it. Rachel knew she couldn't control the digital world. The algorithms would keep churning, opinions would keep flying. But she had found a different kind of power, the ability to step back, to breathe, and to choose her response. And that was no small thing. That was the seed of emotional freedom. 3. The garden of inner peace, digital boundaries, and mindful consumption. Rachel hadn't expected silence to feel so uncomfortable. The first time she turned off her notifications for an entire day, she felt a strange kind of anxiety, like she had misplaced something vital. Her fingers twitched toward her phone every few minutes, only to find a still screen. No pings, no buzzes, no alerts telling her who to be or how to feel, but that discomfort was revealing. It showed her how dependent she had become on external prompts to guide her attention, her energy, even her mood. For years, she had surrendered her peace to the rhythm of a machine designed to interrupt. Now, she was learning to reclaim each quiet moment at a time. She started small. No phones in the bedroom, no apps before breakfast, no social media within the first hour of waking or the last hour before sleep. It wasn't about deprivation, it was about intention. Rachel didn't want to be plugged in by default. She wanted to choose when and how she engaged. To her surprise, those boundaries didn't shrink her world. They expanded it. Without the constant drip of content, her mornings grew slower, more grounded. She rediscovered the sound of birds outside, her apartment, the quiet magic of pouring coffee without a screen in her hand. Her thoughts no longer scattered at the first ping. Instead, they moved with rhythm, with weight. Her mind began to feel like a place worth inhabiting again. It was around this time that she joined a virtual Stoic reading group hosted out of Boston. Every Thursday evening, a dozen strangers gathered on Zoom to reflect on passages from Seneca or Marcus Aurelius. They weren't academics. They were artists, baristas, engineers, nurses, ordinary people seeking a quieter strength in a loud world. Rachel found herself looking forward to those conversations, not just for the philosophy, but for the connection. There were no filters, no curated profiles. Just faces and voices, sometimes tired, sometimes laughing, always real. One week, they discussed the line, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." That quote stayed with her. She wrote it on a sticky note and placed it on the back of her phone. It reminded her that the endless feed wasn't nourishment, it was noise dressed as novelty. So she began an experiment. She deleted every app that didn't serve a meaningful purpose. She trimmed her follows to only those who inspired courage, kindness, thoughtfulness. She called this her digital garden, and like any garden, it required tending. If an account sowed fear, outrage, or envy, she pulled it like a weed. If it nurtured gratitude or growth, she'll let it bloom. To support this new approach, she built a prototype she named the Virtue Timer, a simple app that reminded her at random intervals to pause and reflect on a single question. Am I acting in alignment with my values? It wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant for the App Store. It was for her, a private signal in a world of noise. One Saturday, Rachel went further. She declared a digital Sabbath. From sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, no screens, no emails, no texts, no scrolling. She turned her phone off completely, placed it in a drawer, and stepped into stillness. At first, the silence was jarring. Her mind searched for distractions. But then something subtle unfolded. She began to notice the shape of her own attention, how it drifted, how it returned. She cooked without checking the recipe twice. She took a long walk by Barton Creek and watched the wind ripple through the trees. She felt human again. The absence of the digital revealed the presence of her soul. It became a ritual. Each week, one day unplugged, a return to source. A reminder that peace is not a passive state, it is an active cultivation. Rachel no longer used technology to escape boredom. She used it to elevate her life. Her feed wasn't perfect, but it was intentional. Her screen time didn't vanish, but it became focused. And most of all, her inner world stopped echoing the chaos outside. She realized that the goal wasn't digital purity. It was digital integrity. To use tools without becoming one. To choose quiet when the world shouts. To protect her peace like it was sacred because it was. In the garden of her mind, boundaries were the fences that allowed beauty to grow. And in that cultivated space, she found something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Contentment. 4. Logos in the feed. Practicing wisdom and discernment. Rachel had always thought she was a critical thinker. She prided herself on her education, her ability to sniff out bad logic, her refusal to share a headline without reading the article. But the more she practiced Stoicism, the more she realized that discernment wasn't just about facts, it was about wisdom. And wisdom required something deeper than information. It demanded clarity. In the digital world, clarity was rare. Scrolling through her feed one afternoon, she noticed something curious. It wasn't the content that exhausted her, it was the pace. Headlines clashed with memes, trauma sat beside, dance videos, outrage was repackaged as entertainment. It wasn't just noise, it was chaos disguised as culture. And it wasn't accidental, it was engineered. Rachel began to ask herself a different kind of question. Who benefits from my confusion? Who profits when I'm distracted, divided, disoriented? That question became a turning point. She returned to the Stoics, not just for comfort, but for strategy. Marcus Aurelius had written, "The opinion of others is not the truth." Epictetus warned, "First learn the meaning of what you say, and then speak." These weren't quaint sayings, they were shields against a world that rewards reaction more than reflection. So Rachel began to build what she called digital discernment. It started with her feed. She made it a Sunday ritual, 30 minutes of review, unfollowing accounts that fed her anxiety or ego, keeping only those that nourished her inner life. It was slow work, quiet work, but it was transformative. Over time, her feed changed. Fewer hot takes, more depth. Fewer viral arguments, more enduring truths. She wasn't creating a bubble. She was curating a compass. Rachel also slowed her pace. Instead of skimming 10 articles, she read one deeply. She resisted the urge to comment immediately, to share instantly. If something stirred her emotion, she asked, what virtue is being challenged here? Is this a call to justice, or just another invitation to outrage? She kept a small notebook beside her laptop, titled Feed to Soul. It was where she recorded reflections, not reactions. Questions like, is this information leading me toward wisdom? Am I learning, or just consuming? Am I being entertained, or manipulated? One evening, she and Liam met for coffee and talked about a controversy that had erupted online. A celebrity had made a statement, and the internet exploded. Rachel asked, do we really care about this, or do we just care that everyone else cares? Liam smirked, stirring his coffee. Honestly, I'm starting to think most of the internet runs on borrowed emotion. They sat in silence for a moment, both recognizing the truth in that sentence. It wasn't that opinions were wrong. It was that wisdom required the space to test them, to examine their roots, to hold them against the light of reason. And that kind of space didn't come easily in an algorithm-driven world. So Rachel made her own space. She blocked off an hour each week for what she called slow knowledge. No scrolling, just reading from physical books, or listening to long-form discussions that prioritized nuance over novelty. It was in those moments that her thinking sharpened, not with certainty, but with discernment. She also began practicing what she called the logos pause. When she encountered a piece of information that provoked her something inflammatory, shocking, or emotionally charged, she waited, not out of passivity, but out of principle. The pause became her anchor, a way to ensure her next step was guided by values, not algorithms. One day, she caught herself about to retweet a clever post mocking a politician she disagreed with. Her thumb hovered. She paused. She asked, "Is this wise? Or just clever?" She put her phone down. That moment mattered. Rachel knew she couldn't fact-check the entire internet. She couldn't correct every falsehood or outshout every voice. But she could choose her intake. She could guard her mind like a temple. She could seek wisdom in a place designed for attention. And slowly, the fog began to lift. She no longer chased trending topics just to feel informed. She no longer felt guilty for not knowing every detail of every crisis. Instead, she sought to understand what truly mattered to her and to act on it with clarity, not noise. Her discernment didn't make her superior. It made her steady. In a world addicted to urgency, Rachel had chosen understanding. And in that choice, she rediscovered something rare, almost ancient, a kind of quiet wisdom that could still survive, even in the feed. 5. The fortress within. Stoic courage in the face of online attacks. The attack came quietly, like they usually do. A tweet, a thread, a digital ambush dressed in sarcasm and half-truths. Rachel had written a short post on the importance of mindful tech use, just a reflection, really, nothing provocative, but within hours, it was screenshotted, quoted out of context, and thrust into the chaotic center of someone else's agenda. The comments followed quickly. Mockery, accusations, people calling her naive, privileged, tone-deaf. Others jumped in, not to add clarity, but to throw fuel on a fire they didn't start and didn't care to understand. Her inbox flooded. Her pulse rose. The familiar flood of shame and anger surged like a tide she couldn't hold back. She locked her phone, breathing unevenly. The old version of her would have spiraled, argued, defended, deleted everything, maybe even disappeared for a while. But now, something in her held firm. It wasn't pride. It wasn't detachment. It was a quiet voice that reminded her, courage isn't loud, and strength doesn't always fight back. She pulled her journal from the shelf and wrote in block letters, "They cannot harm your soul unless you let them in." She had read that line once in a commentary on Marcus Aurelius. And now, in this moment, it wasn't just a quote, it was a shield. Rachel didn't respond to the mob. She didn't engage with the snide comments or the strangers demanding apologies for a sentence they misunderstood. Instead, she did something that felt more radical. She stayed still. She went for a walk. She breathed deeply. She texted Liam. "They're dragging me," she wrote. "Then stay grounded," he replied. "You've already won if you don't lose yourself." It wasn't about being passive. Stoicism never taught resignation. It taught discernment. And in that moment, Rachel realized how often we mistake reaction for power when sometimes real strength is restraint. She remembered something else. Marcus had ruled an empire. He faced war, betrayal, plague. And still, he wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." In other words, don't become what you despise. She chose to keep the post up, not out of stubbornness, but out of integrity. She reread what she had written. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, thoughtful, meant to help, not harm. If others misunderstood it, she could clarify. If they chose not to, that wasn't her burden to carry. That night, she lay in bed with a storm of emotions still flickering beneath her ribs. But she wasn't afraid. She wasn't shaken. She was, in some strange way, proud. Courage in the digital age isn't about being unprepared. It's about knowing what matters enough to stand by it, even when it costs you comfort. It's about being okay with being misunderstood. It's about knowing that dignity is not something others give. It's something you don't surrender. Rachel made a promise to herself that night. She would not let the temporary noise of strangers change the permanent truth of her values. The next day, she wrote a quiet follow-up. No defensiveness, just clarity. She explained her intent with grace. She acknowledged the need for nuance. She thanked those who had offered thoughtful disagreement, and then she signed off. She didn't wait for validation. She didn't track likes or retweets. She walked away, heart steady. Later, she added a new line to the sticky notes she kept on her wall. Don't react to be right. Respond to be whole. Over time, the storm passed. The attackers moved on, hungry for their next target. The silence returned, and with it, a deeper strength. Rachel had built something they couldn't touch, an inner fortress, fortified not by defiance, but by philosophy, patience, and self-trust. She knew now that the most dangerous attacks didn't come from others, they came from within. When you abandon your principles to please the crowd. But she hadn't. She stayed true, and in a world where people rise and fall by the speed of opinions, that kind of courage is not only rare, it's revolutionary. 6. From screen to soul. Living virtuously in a digital world. A year later, Rachel's digital world looked almost unrecognizable, not because the platforms had changed, but because she had. Her relationship with technology had shifted from compulsive to conscious, from reactive to reflective. She no longer reached for her phone in moments of boredom or unease. She no longer allowed apps to define the rhythm of her days. Her screen time hadn't vanished, but it had evolved into a space shaped by clarity, not chaos. She still posted, still scrolled, still checked in, but everything now carried intention. She shared what felt true, not what felt trendy. Her words weren't curated to please, they were crafted to serve. Her timeline wasn't a competition. It was a conversation with others, yes, but more importantly, with herself. Rachel had learned that living virtuously in a digital world wasn't about withdrawing from it. It was about bringing the soul into it. And that required practice, patience, humility. She had kept up her journaling, now supported by a digital app that she and Liam had started prototyping together, something quiet and ad-free, filled not with tasks but prompts rooted in Stoic virtues. Questions like, did I act with courage today? Or did I pursue what is good, not just what is easy? These tiny reflections became a kind of spiritual hygiene, scrubbing away the dust that the digital world left behind. Rachel also returned to community, not just online, but in person. One cool evening in Austin, she organized a local gathering of the Stoic group she'd once joined over Zoom. They met at Zilker Park, sitting on picnic blankets with thermoses of tea and copies of meditations tucked under their arms. No one checked their phones. No one filmed it. They just talked about virtue, struggle, clarity, and what it meant to be awake in a world constantly trying to distract them. That night, as she watched strangers become friends under the soft Texas sky, Rachel felt something rare. Peace, not because everything was quiet, but because she had finally stopped running from herself. Living with virtue in the digital age didn't mean avoiding noise. It meant learning how to move through it without being swept away. It meant knowing when to speak and when to be silent, when to disconnect and when to engage. It meant choosing truth over popularity, values over validation. She had come to believe that everyone needed a kind of internal compass, a system of values, not determined by likes, shares, or trends, but by something deeper. For her, Stoicism had become that compass, not as a set of rules, but as a way of seeing, a way of choosing, a way of living. Her home screen now featured a single quote: "Only the present is yours. Do not waste it in distraction." It reminded her every time she reached for her device that presence was a choice she could make again and again. Rachel didn't claim to have it all figured out. Some days were harder than others. She still slipped into old patterns, still felt the pull of validation, still struggled with the tension between sharing honestly and protecting her peace. But now, she saw those struggles not as failures, but as the terrain of the work itself. Living with virtue, she had learned, wasn't about perfection. It was about returning to what mattered, to what was within her control, to what made her soul feel less scattered and more whole. And perhaps most importantly, she realized that the digital world, for all its flaws, wasn't devoid of goodness. It could be a place of courage, of empathy, of truth, but only if people like her brought those things into it, if they modeled them, if they planted them like seeds. Rachel had become one of those people. She hadn't escaped the screen. She had brought her soul into it. And in doing so, she hadn't just changed her life. She had helped light a path for others to follow, not away from technology, but toward themselves. Rachel's journey began with a digital unraveling, a moment of emotional collapse, triggered by one cruel comment in the middle of the night. But it wasn't just the message that broke her. It was the weight of years spent chasing validation, drowning in comparison, and letting the digital noise shape her sense of self. She had lost her inner compass in a world that constantly rewarded reaction and punished stillness. But in the quiet aftermath of that moment, something shifted. What started as a simple encounter with Stoic philosophy evolved into a full transformation. Rachel didn't escape technology. She didn't move off-grid or delete all her apps. She did something much harder. She stayed and chose to live differently within it. She learned to pause before reacting, to observe her thoughts instead of becoming them. She questioned the sources of her emotions, reframed her relationship with attention, and began to treat her mind as sacred ground. Each notification became a moment of practice, each emotion an opportunity to return to virtue. Through digital boundaries and mindful consumption, she discovered that peace wasn't found in disconnecting completely. It was found in choosing how to connect. She cultivated her feed like a garden. She made space for wisdom by removing noise. She learned to discern what was helpful from what was simply loud, and when criticism came again and it did, she didn't flinch. She stood in her truth, not because she had built walls, but because she had built a foundation. Rachel's strength didn't come from control over others. It came from control over herself. In the end, she emerged not as someone untouched by the chaos of the digital world, but as someone transformed by it. Her phone was no longer her master. Her mind was no longer scattered. Her soul was no longer hidden behind a screen. She had turned the digital maze into a place of meaning and invited others to do the same. The lesson here isn't just Rachel's, it's ours. In a world addicted to noise, stillness is a superpower. In a world fueled by outrage.com is revolutionary. And in a world that rewards appearances, authenticity is an act of quiet rebellion. You don't have to disappear to reclaim your peace. You just have to decide what matters, more being seen or being whole. Rachel chose wholeness. You can too. So, let me ask you, which part of Rachel's journey resonated with you the most? And how do you think Stoic habits could shift the way you use technology? Comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your struggles, your own experiments with digital clarity. Let's learn from each other. Let's create a space where virtue still matters even through the screen. And if this story inspired you, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps more than you know and gives us the fuel to keep making meaningful content like this. Stay grounded, stay brave, and remember, the most powerful app you'll ever use is your own mind.